I never thought I'd be here sitting in front of a canvas feeling like my entire world had come crashing down. You see, art has always been my escape. My name is Alana Cortez. I'm 26, and I've always lived for creating. It's my voice, my language, my way of connecting with the world. Austin, Texas is where that's how it all began. The betrayal, I mean. Me and Mia, she was my best friend since college. We shared everything. From the dreams of one day having our own gallery to the heartbreaks, the late night talks about our futures. And I never told anyone about it. It wasn't just any art. It was a collection of pieces I had been working on in secret for over a year. The kind of art that's raw, personal, the kind that nobody else would understand unless you were inside my head. I trusted Mia with everything. She was more than just a friend, she was my confidant, my partner in crime. I confided in her and then it happened. I walked into the gallery last week expecting to see my work featured in a small local show, just a few pieces, nothing major. There in the center of the room was my art, my ideas, my vision, but signed with her name, Mia. I froze. My heart dropped to my stomach. I thought I was going to puke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. No, this was deliberate. Mia had stolen everything. Every piece I had shared with her, every single one of my secrets was now. I wanted to scream to confront her right there, but instead I just stood, frozen, my hands trembling. How could she do this? How could she take everything I had worked for? I walked out of that gallery feeling empty. How could I have been so blind? She wasn't just my best friend. She was someone who knew my soul. The betrayal wasn't just in the art, it was in the way she looked me in the eye all those months and pretended everything was fine. I had poured my heart into those pieces. I shared my most vulnerable moments with her. And she took. The anger started to burn inside me, but beneath it there was something deeper hurt. I had trusted her more than anyone in the world, and now I felt but I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the quiet artist who just let this happen. I was going to make sure the world knew the truth. I had a plan. It wouldn't be easy, but I would get back at Mia in a way she'd never, and it would start with the very thing she had stolen from me, my art. The betrayal stung, but now I was. The more I thought about it, the more the idea of getting revenge on Mia started to feel right. I wasn't going to sit back and let her ruin everything I'd worked for. I'd worked too hard, fought too many battles to get where I was. Mia may have thought she could erase me, but I was going to make sure that she never ever. I had a plan, and it was going to take time. The whole world would know the truth, and it would start with social media. It's a digital world now, and everyone was looking for the next viral sensation. I began working on a new project, something that would overshadow Mia's stolen works. This wasn't just about exposing her, it was about reclaiming what was mine. I started gathering pieces of my original collection, the ones I had kept hidden from everyone, and I turned them into something bigger, more powerful, a statement. I knew the art world. I knew how to play the game. Mia might have stolen my ideas, but she had no idea what I was capable of. I was going to use the one thing. The first step was to create a series of posts on social media. Simple, subtle at first. I started with Instagram because, let's face it, that's where the art world lives now. I uploaded a picture of one of my pieces, the one Mia had copied almost exactly, but this time I added a twist. The caption wasn't just a description of the art, it was a message. A quiet accusation. I wrote, that was just the beginning. The comments started rolling in almost immediately. Some people didn't get it yet, but others, they started questioning the originality of Mia's work. Slowly but surely the seed had been planted. And I didn't stop there. I released more posts, each more daring, more direct. The art world full of gossip and whispers began to catch on. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. And when they did, Mia wouldn't have anywhere to hide. But even as I watched everything unfold, a little voice inside of me kept wondering, was this enough? Was ruining her reputation really going to fix what she did to me? Part of me wanted more. Part of me wanted to take everything she had to watch her fall from grace the way she made me feel so small. But no, I wasn't going to let anger control me. I was better than that. But that didn't mean I wasn't going to enjoy watching her world crumble. The posts kept rolling in one after another. Each one felt like a victory, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that kept tugging at me. Was this really enough? Would this slow? The art world was buzzing now. The whispers had turned into a full-blown storm. Mia's show was still up, but more and more people were questioning the authenticity of her work. Some were even reaching out to me, not directly, of course. They knew I had something to do with this. There was no way it was just coincidence that I'd started posting right after the gallery show went up. And some even left me messages of support asking me if I was the artist behind the stolen piece. I wish I knew. Every day felt like a tug of war between what I knew I had to do and the small voice telling me to let it go. But I couldn't. Not when Mia was out there pretending to be someone she wasn't. Not when she was profiting. I took the next step, something bigger. I found out about a prestigious art fair that was coming up in a few weeks. The perfect opportunity to really make a splash. A way to show the world what Mia had taken from me to make sure no one would ever forget my name again. So I decided to create an art installation that would speak louder than anything I'd ever made before. I spent countless sleepless nights putting it together, pieces of my stolen art, the originals, the ones Mia thought she could erase. But this time, I was going to make it bigger. I used projections, video clips, and interactive components. A whole immersive experience that showed the transformation of my art from personal creations to stolen masterpieces, highlighting how the piece was going to be everything. It was going to reveal the truth, and not just to a handful of people on Instagram. I was going to show the world. But even as I was working on this, there was a part of me that felt sick. Was I going too far? Every moment spent perfecting the installation felt like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The anger, I remembered the nights Mia and I used to talk for hours, planning our futures, sharing our dreams. I thought back to the first time I shared my art with her. The way she looked at me with admiration. Was I really going to destroy her? But the question that kept echoing in my head was, what if I didn't? What if I just let her get away with this? What if I never showed the world who I truly was? I couldn't let that happen. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, about owning what was mine and letting everyone know that nobody could take that away from me. Not Mia, not anyone. The day of the art fair finally, I'd spent weeks planning, designing, and perfecting every single detail. My mind had become consumed with the idea of exposing Mia, but somewhere deep down it had also become something else, something personal. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my identity as an artist. The gallery space was everything I wanted it to be: dark, moody, filled with shadows, yet somehow with an undeniable glow. The walls were adorned with pieces of my stolen work, but I didn't leave it at that. On each wall, projections of Mia's show started flickering, stolen pieces with timestamps of when I had first created them. Then there were the video installations, looping images of my old sketches, my hands in motion as I created them, interspersed with flashes of Mia's smug face at her own art shows. The contrast was glaring, her arrogance against my vulnerability. The video finally culminated in a zoom. I stood in front of the installation watching as the first visitors trickled in. They were immediately drawn to the immersive experience, asking questions, murmuring in excitement. I had to fight to keep my emotions in check. My heartbeat thudded loudly in my chest, my fingers tingling. It wasn't long before someone noticed the caption on the final projection. The truth always finds its way, just like art. Stolen, but never forgotten. And then I saw it. The first comment. It was a message from one of Mia's closest colleagues in the art world. Wait, is this about Mia? The floodgates opened after that. It didn't take long for the truth to spread like wildfire. People started tagging Mia's gallery in every post. Her show, once filled with pride and praise, now turned into the subject of ridicule. Her reputation. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Was this what I wanted? But no sooner had I allowed myself to feel relief than the feeling shifted. In the crowd, I saw Mia. She was standing just a few feet away, frozen. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. I wanted to walk over to her to see the expression on her face up close, but something held me back. Part of me wanted to gloat, to make her understand the depth of the betrayal she'd caused, but I didn't want to be that person. So I stayed where I was, watching her fall apart from the sidelines, watching everything she had built come crashing down. The days after the art installation felt like I was walking in a haze. The buzz around my viral project had become overwhelming, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. Mia's name was everywhere, being dragged through the mud, questioned, scrutinized by everyone in the art world. But even as I watched her reputation, I kept telling myself this was enough. I had exposed her. She could never go back to pretending she was the original creator. But why didn't it feel like justice? Wasn't I supposed to feel vindicated? Yet the more I thought about it, it was about me. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through social media, seeing how many people were talking about the betrayal, about the stolen art. The comments were divided. Some applauded me for exposing the truth, while others called me petty, bitter, and cruel. A part of me wanted to respond, to lash out at the people who didn't understand, who didn't see how personal this was for me. But I stopped myself. Mia had already stolen my art. I wasn't about to let her steal my— Then the phone call came. It was Mia. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. She said I'd been expecting this. In some twisted part of me, I had anticipated her reaching out, but I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't want to show up. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me torn apart, but I knew that if I didn't meet her, I would never get the closure I needed. We met at a small cafe in the corner of town, a place where we used to sit for hours talking about everything and nothing. I walked in, my heart pounding, and there she was, sitting in the same spot we always used to. She looked broken. The confident, arrogant Mia. Alana. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I'm sorry, I messed up. I was wrong. I didn't know what I was thinking. I cut her off. You didn't think. That's the problem, Mia. You didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about our friendship. You took something that wasn't yours, and now it's too late. She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. For a moment, I saw the girl I used to trust, the one who shared my dreams, the one who promised me we'd rise together. But then the cold truth washed over me again. This wasn't about the girl I once knew. This was about the person I'd become. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mia whispered, her voice small. But I need you to know, I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't just about the art. It was about proving to myself that I could do something on my own. I didn't let her finish. You don't get to play the victim here, Mia. You had a choice, and you chose to hurt me. And now you'll— She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I had no sympathy left for her. She wasn't the person I thought she was. The girl I trusted was gone, replaced by someone who had destroyed everything. I stood up, my decision final. I'm done with this conversation. I've moved on, Mia, and I suggest you do this. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders. This was it. This was the moment I knew I could finally let go of the anger. The revenge wasn't about bringing her down, it was about me finding the strength to walk. But I knew this wouldn't be the last time I heard her name. Mia's legacy would always be tied to mine, and somehow that made me feel stronger. I had won. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The whole world had seen Mia's betrayal, and the art community was never going to forget it. Her reputation had been shattered, her gallery shows questioned, and my art had finally been— But there was something I hadn't anticipated. A twist in the story that I hadn't seen come. It happened a few weeks after the art fair. I was in my studio starting to work on my new pieces when I got a message that made my heart stop. It was from a well-known art critic, someone I'd admired for years. It didn't take long for me to realize what this was about. Mia's downfall had left a gaping hole in the art world, and now it seemed like everyone wanted to know my side of the story. The critic wanted me to talk about my work, about the art that had been stolen, and how I had fought back. He said that it was time for me. I agreed, thinking this would be the closure I needed. I thought it would feel like a final victory. But when I sat down for the interview, he didn't want to talk about my art. At first, it was just small comments about the pieces I had been working on, but then he shifted the focus completely. He asked about Mia. Not about the theft, not about the betrayal, but about her. He wanted to know how I felt about forgiving her. I felt my chest tighten, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. I didn't want to forgive her. I didn't think I ever would. But that wasn't the question I was being asked. I realized then that the story people were interested in wasn't the one I wanted to tell. They didn't care about my art, my passion, my work. They cared about the drama. I tried to steer the conversation back to my art, to what really mattered to me. But the critic was relentless. But what about Mia? He pressed over and over again. Wasn't there a part of you? I paused. The words hung in the air, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The truth was, part of me had wanted to destroy her. I wanted to watch her fall, to watch her pay for what she'd done to me. I looked into the critic's eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. And then, without really thinking, I said something that shocked even. No, I said softly, I don't want to destroy her. But I wanted to show the world the truth. I wanted to prove that I was more than just someone who was taken advantage of. I wanted my art to stand. It wasn't a confession of forgiveness. It wasn't an admission of weakness. The critic nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He wasn't interested in redemption. He wasn't interested in healing. He wanted a story, a scandal. That night, I sat alone in my studio, staring at the blank canvas in front of me. For the first time in months, I felt unsure. Had I done the right thing? Was my quest? And then, as if the universe was answering my doubts, I received another message. It was short, just a few words, but it hit me harder than anything else had. I'm sorry, Alana. I know I can't make it right, but I'm sorry. For a moment, I sat there staring at the screen. I had no idea what to say back. I didn't want to respond. I didn't want to open that door again. Maybe it wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe it was about letting go. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message and turned back to the canvas. It was time to start over. Time to focus on the only thing that had ever mattered to me, my art. The days after Mia's message were quiet, almost too quiet. I hadn't expected her to reach out, but part of me had hoped that message would be the closure I needed. But now it just felt like another piece of the puzzle I didn't know how to solve. My life, my art, my everything had been turned upside down by a single betrayal. It was time to move on. I started to put my energy into my work again, but this time, something was different. My pieces weren't driven by anger anymore. They weren't about Mia or her betrayal. They were about me. I started creating for the sake of creation, for the sake of art, not as a form of revenge or validation. I found joy in every brushstroke, every line, every color. But freedom doesn't always come easily. As I worked, I kept hearing the whispers of the past, of the scandal, of the drama, of the way I had exposed Mia. I could hear the conversations in my head. Was she really a victim? Was I the villain? It was like a constant echo taunting me. And while I had moved on, the truth was I didn't care if people thought I was petty or cruel. I had to live with the choices I'd made. But it didn't make them any easier. A few weeks later, I was invited to an exclusive art exhibit, one that was supposed to showcase the work of rising stars. Mia's name wasn't on the invite, and it felt like a small victory. But as I arrived, there across the room was Mia. She looked different. Less confident, less arrogant. She wasn't in the spotlight, wasn't surrounded by admirers. She looked more like the person I had once known, vulnerable human. She saw me too. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment I thought about walking away, pretending I didn't see her. But something in me, something stronger than the anger and the hurt, told. I walked over to her. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like she was waiting for me to make the first move. I could feel the weight of everything between us, the years of friendship, the betrayal, the pain. It didn't matter anymore. "Hey," I said, my voice steady but soft. "How are you?" Her face softened, and she let out a long breath, almost as if she was relieved that I was the one. "I'm okay," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I've been trying to figure things out. I know I messed up, Alana. I hurt you, and I'll never be able to fix that. But I nodded slowly. "I get it. I do. But Mia, making things right isn't about fixing what's broken between us. It's about owning." She nodded back, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and acceptance. "I've learned that, Alana." I didn't know what to say next. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I wanted from this conversation. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. But I also knew that holding on— "Look," I said after a long pause. "I've moved on. I've found my way back to my art." Her lips trembled and she finally looked up at me. "I'm happy for you," she whispered. "I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. But I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I walked away from that conversation with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge anymore. It was about the lesson I had learned that sometimes letting go is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the thing that's— I didn't need Mia's approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. My art was mine, and that was enough. A week passed after my conversation with Mia. Life went on as it always does. People moved on. The art world shifted its attention elsewhere. The critics stopped talking about my past with Mia, and I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole thing anymore. Yes, I had exposed Mia for what she was, but I also realized that the more I clung to that anger, the more I let her control me. She had already taken so much from me: my art, my trust, my peace of mind. And if I decided then that I was done with the past, I was done with her, done with the drama, done with I started pouring myself into my work more than ever before. Every stroke of the brush, every piece of clay I molded felt like a release. It wasn't about Mia anymore. It wasn't even about proving anything to anyone. It was about me. But as I worked, something unexpected happened. People began to take notice again. I received invitations to galleries I'd only dreamed of, and curators began to approach me with offers to showcase my pieces. Slowly, my name started to rise. But it wasn't because of the scandal anymore. It was because of my work. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was creating. I had become an artist in my own right, not in the shadow of Mia's betrayal, but in the light of my own potential. The more I created, the more I realized that what mattered wasn't the recognition or the validation. What mattered was the journey I had taken to get here. And then there was the gallery show, the one that would define the next step in my career. I had poured my heart and soul into the pieces, an exploration of the themes I had always wanted to explore, but had been too afraid to do so before. The opening night was a whirlwind. The crowd was bigger than I had imagined, and the feedback was overwhelming. But there, standing at the center of it all, I was standing beside one of my pieces when a young woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. "I saw your art online," she said, her voice quiet but filled with admiration. "It changed how I see art. I've been struggling with my own work, but seeing yours made me feel like maybe I could keep going. You showed me that I don't need to." I was taken aback. This wasn't just praise about the technique or the composition. This was about something deeper, something that I hadn't expected. My art had impacted her in a way I hadn't anticipated. It had inspired her. It made me realize that in the end, that was the true victory. Not the revenge. I smiled genuinely this time. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little shaky. "That means more to me than you'll—" As the night went on, I found myself surrounded by more and more people who shared similar stories. Stories of struggles, of creativity, of fighting back against the odds. They all saw something in my work that I hadn't seen in myself, a message of resilience. A message that no matter how many times, and in that moment, standing there surrounded by people who were moved by my art, I realized that Mia's betrayal had been the catalyst for something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. It hadn't just led to my exposure, it had led me to this. The place where that night I wasn't thinking about Mia. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't even thinking about what the future held. For the first time in a long time, I was simply present. I was here doing what I loved creating and, most importantly, at peace with myself. A few months had passed since my last encounter with Mia, and life had continued to move forward, sometimes at a pace that felt too fast, other times too slow. But in those months, something inside me had finally clicked. I was no longer defined by what Mia had done to me. I wasn't defined by the betrayal or the anger or even the revenge. I had built something of my own, and I was proud of it. I was finally creating again, not out of spite, but because it was who I was. My art had become my own voice, my own narrative, and it was the gallery show I had put together in the wake of everything had opened doors for me. The offers from curators, the invitations to other shows, they were overwhelming, and at the same time, they were a reminder of how far I had come. But I wasn't just riding on the coattails of a viral scandal anymore. The more I put my soul into my pieces, the more I realized that my identity as and that was what I wanted now to inspire. I was standing in the middle of my new exhibition, surrounded by the pieces that I had worked on in these past few months. Each one of them held a part of me. It was strange, really. I used to think I could never share these parts of myself with the world. People were starting to gather around, admiring the work, discussing it. The conversation was different this time. It was no longer about scandal or drama. It was about my art. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing by focusing on me, not on. I heard someone approach me. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, with a curious look on her face. "I love this piece," she said, pointing to one of the larger paintings in the center of the room. "It feels so raw, like you're putting your heart on the canvas." I smiled. It was exactly what I had been going for. "Thank you," I said softly. "That's exactly it. I wanted to capture that feeling of being open, vulnerable," and she nodded, looking around at the other pieces. "It's amazing. It's inspiring, actually. I've been struggling with my own art, trying to find my voice. But after seeing this, maybe I've been..." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the only one who had been affected by this journey. I wasn't the only one who had struggled with their identity, with trusting. "You will," I said to her, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You'll find your voice just like I did. You just have to be brave enough to listen to." As the crowd continued to buzz around the gallery, I stood there, taking in the moment. I had found what I needed: peace. I had let go of the pain Mia caused me, and in return, I had found the strength to move forward. I no longer felt shackled by my past. Instead, I was creating a future for myself. A future built on my own terms. I wasn't defined by anyone else anymore. Mia had tried to break me, but all she had done was push me to find who I really was. And that, in the end, was the greatest revenge of all. It had been months since the art show, and things had shifted once again. Mia was out of the public eye, and the noise around her had started to fade. But what I had gained from it all was something far more valuable than any fleeting fame. As time passed, my art continued to evolve. No longer shackled by anger or the ghosts of my past, I found myself experimenting with new mediums, new techniques. My work became even more personal, a true reflection of who I was. No more hidden layers, no more secrets. It was all laid bare for the world. But then one evening, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from an art dealer I had been introduced to a while back, "Alana, we've been following your journey and we think it's time. There's a gallery in New York, one of the biggest in the city. They want to showcase your work. This could be the big break you've been waiting for." The words hit me like a punch in the chest. A gallery in New York. My work. This was everything I had dreamed of and more. But there was a part of me that hesitated, a part that wondered if I was truly ready for this. The gallery in New York was no small deal. It wasn't just about the exposure. It was the validation I had spent my entire life chasing. It was the opportunity to show the world that I was the one who had built something from nothing. But as I stood there staring at the phone, I realized something important. I didn't need validation from anyone anymore. I didn't need approval or recognition to know that I had made it. The work I had done, the journey I had taken, that was enough. The success, the accolades, they didn't define me. So I made my decision. I didn't take the offer, not because I wasn't ready, but because I had already arrived. I had found peace within myself, and that was far more valuable than I focused on my own path. I began to explore new ventures, new ways to bring my art to the world. I started working with younger artists, mentoring them, showing them that there was more to art than just technique. And as I sat in my studio watching the sun set over Austin, I realized that the real victory wasn't the fame or the glory, it was the journey. It was the moments of doubt and struggle that had shaped me into who I was now. Every brushstroke, every challenge, every loss had led me to this point. I was no longer defined by anyone else's opinion of me. I had learned the greatest lesson of all true freedom comes when you stop seeking approval and start living for yourself. And that was something no one could ever take from me. It's funny how life works. Sometimes the hardest moments, the ones that seem like I had spent so long defining myself by others' actions. For months, I was just a victim, a woman who had been betrayed, whose life had been turned upside down. I'd let Mia take so much from me, and I let the world see me as the one who was wronged. But somewhere along the way, that story started to... The truth is, I had become someone new, someone stronger, someone who didn't need the approval of the art world of Mia, of anyone, to know her worth. I had built a life based on my own vision, my own passion, and now as I stood in front of my latest exhibit, my greatest work yet, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. The gallery was packed with people, the kind of crowd I had once dreamed about when I was just starting out. But it wasn't about the crowd. It was about the art itself. I had spent months creating this body of work. It wasn't just about techniques or impressive visuals. It was personal. It was everything I had learned, everything I had felt. It was the culmination of all the pain, the healing, the growth. Each piece told a story, my story, but it was also universal. It was about finding yourself after everything is taken from you. The opening night was everything I could have hoped for. The art critics were raving. Buyers were eyeing my pieces, and the media was buzzing with excitement. But even as I saw all of this unfold, I knew one thing for sure. It was my victory, not me. I stepped aside for a moment to take it all in. I watched as people admired my work, as they spoke in awe about the depth, the emotion, and the truth behind it. This wasn't just And then I saw her again, Mia. I had almost forgotten what she looked like. But there she was, standing in the corner of the gallery watching me. She looked different. Gone was the self-assured, smug woman I once knew. For a moment I felt a wave of emotion rush through me. I had expected to feel anger or resentment, but instead I felt nothing. Mia didn't matter to me anymore. She had once been my best friend, my confidant, and then she became my betrayer. But now she was just another face in the crowd. And that I realized I didn't need her approval. I didn't need to see her fall. I didn't need any. I had already won. And in that moment, as the crowd continued to admire my work, I finally understood what Mia had taken from me: nothing. Because everything I had worked for, everything that mattered, was mine. And that would never be taken from me again. Months passed, and with each day I found myself becoming more and more at peace with the path I had taken. My art continued to thrive, and with every new piece I could feel the weight of the past lifting. Mia's betrayal, the drama, the heartache, it had all led me to this place of self-discovery. But even the world was moving on, but I still hadn't really confronted Mia. I had avoided seeing her, avoided really facing her since the last time we spoke. And while I had found peace within myself, I couldn't help but feel there was one last thing I needed to do to let go completely. It wasn't going to be easy. Forgiveness was never simple, not after everything that had happened. But I was tired of carrying the burden. I was tired of letting her actions control my life, my emotion, and so I reached out to her. The message was simple, short. Mia, we need to talk. I didn't know what I expected to happen, but I knew it was time to face the last part of this journey. I had to face her not as the person who had been wronged. A week later, I met her at a quiet cafe. She looked like she hadn't changed much, still the same Mia I remembered, but with a sense of vulnerability that hadn't been there before. There was no smugness in her eyes now, no false sense of superiority. She seemed... I didn't expect to hear from you, Mia said, her voice quiet. I didn't expect to reach out, I admitted, sitting across from her. But I've been thinking... We never really had closure. I've moved on, but She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously. Alana, I don't know if I can ever make it right. I can't take back what I did to you. I've hurt you in ways I'll never be able to fix. I didn't know what I wanted to hear from her. There was no magic phrase that could undo the past. But the words that came out of my mouth, I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm not even asking you to apologize, not in the way you think. What I need is for you to know that I'm not angry anymore. Mia's eyes widened. You're not angry? No, I said softly. I'm not angry. I've let it go. And that's something you'll never be able to. She swallowed hard, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. But you're I nodded. I'm more than okay. I'm free. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. I wasn't doing this for Mia. I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself. The weight that had once held me down was finally gone. The anger, the hurt, it had all faded into the background, and all that remained. Mia sat silently for a while, and I let the silence hang between us. There was nothing more to say. There was nothing left to fix. We were two people who had shared a past, but who had to let go in order. As I stood up to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked out of that cafe with my head held high, ready to face whatever the future held. The chapter with Mia was finally closed, and I could finally embrace the freedom that came with truly letting go. The months that followed my meeting with Mia felt like a quiet rebirth. Everything seemed to slow down, yet I felt like I was moving at a speed I could finally control. My art was no longer just about reclaiming what had been taken from me. It was about building a future, one that was entirely my own. The offers kept coming. Gallery invitations, commissions, recognition from the art world that I had once desperately craved. But this time, it didn't feel like a validation of my worth. It was just a reflection of the work I had done. And that I had begun to mentor young artists, guiding them not just in technique, but in how to protect their hearts, their creativity, and their vision. I taught them that the real power in art comes from authenticity, not from playing games. And yet there were still moments when I thought back to Mia, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of understanding. I had spent so much time wishing she would understand the damage she caused, but I had forgotten that the real healing didn't come from her apology. One evening, as I stood in my studio looking over my latest work, a thought hit me. I was no longer the person I was when Mia first betrayed me. I was someone stronger. Someone who had learned, grown, and embraced every part of the past was no longer something I had to fight against. It was just a chapter in the story of who I had become, and that story. I realized then that my true legacy wouldn't be the art I created, nor the revenge I'd exacted. It would be the way I lived my life from this point forward on my terms, with my heart in my... The woman who had once been broken, who had been torn apart by betrayal, was now whole. And I was ready to face whatever the future held with the knowledge it was a new beginning. And this time, I was the one in control. It's been over a year now since that fateful day at the gallery when everything changed. The whirlwind of betrayal, revenge, and all the chaos that followed felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Time had done its work, and now standing here in front of my latest piece, I can say I'd finally come to a place where I wasn't just an artist, but someone who had learned to live with herself. I wasn't just creating for the sake of revenge or validation. I was creating because it was what I was meant to do. And as much as I'd like to say that all the anger and pain had disappeared in time, I remember the early days when I was so consumed with Mia's betrayal, so focused on getting back at her, that I could barely see beyond the pain. But over time, the focus shifted. The art became mine, not just something I created out of spite, but something that expressed my truth, my emotions, my growth. The revenge I had once craved faded into the background, replaced by something and now as I looked at my latest work, a reflection of all the lessons I had learned, all the struggles I had faced, I realized that I was finally in control. This wasn't just about Mia. It was about the person I had become in the process. The woman who had faced betrayal, hardship, and loss. The gallery show was almost here. This one was different from the others. It was bigger, more prestigious, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of what people would think of the judgments that might come. As I stood in front of my work looking at the people arriving, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from winning or from beating Mia. It was the kind of peace that comes when you've finally made peace with yourself. The kind of peace that comes when you realize that the night was full of smiles, compliments, and admiration. But the truth was none of it mattered to me anymore. I was no longer looking for external validation. The pride I felt was for the journey I had taken, for the lesson. And then, just as the evening was winding down, I saw Mia. She was standing near the back of the room looking at one of my pieces. She looked different. She wasn't the same person who had walked into my life and stolen everything I had once trusted her with. She looked like someone who had learned just like me. She wasn't the smug, self-assured woman. Our eyes met, and for a moment I felt that familiar rush of emotion, the mix of anger, regret, and confusion that I had fought so hard to move beyond. But as I looked at her, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel the rage anymore. I didn't feel the need to confront her. I simply felt nothing. Not the anger that once consumed me, not the pain that had torn me apart. Just nothing. I had truly moved on. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to have one last showdown. I had already won. I had found peace within myself. I had created something beautiful. Mia stood there for a moment, her gaze flickering between me and my work, before she walked away without a word. I watched her go, but I didn't chase her. I didn't need closure. As the night ended, I felt a sense of freedom that I couldn't quite put into words. The woman who had been betrayed was no longer who I was. I had evolved, and in that evolution, I had found something far more powerful than revenge. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. It's strange how much change can happen in a year. A year ago, I was still carrying the weight of betrayal, of anger, of feeling like I had been robbed of something essential to who I was. And now I stand on the other side of it with an understanding of myself that I'm no longer the person I was when Mia and I first met. That girl was full of hope, trust, and an innocence that the world quickly broke. But now I am someone else. Someone who has been forged by fire, shaped by experiences that I couldn't have predicted. I have walked through the darkness, and now The day after the gallery show, I sat alone in my studio looking around at the space I had built for myself. It was a quiet kind of victory. It wasn't about the applause or the recognition, although I'd be lying if I said that didn't feel good. What mattered more to me now was the fact that I had finally stepped into my own power. I had become my own person. I was no longer defined by what Mia did to me. I began to explore new ideas in my art, new techniques, new ways to express the things I had learned over the past year. I started collaborating with other artists, sharing my knowledge and experiences, but also learning from them. I realized that art for me was never about winning or losing. It was in my personal life, I had become more selective. I no longer opened up to just anyone. Trust had to be earned, but the people who had stuck by me, the ones who had never wavered in their support, those were the people who truly mattered. And then one day, out of nowhere, I received another message from Mia. I had moved on from her. I had forgiven her in my own way, and I didn't need to hear from her again. I hesitated for a moment, but then I opened it. Alana, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about me, about the mistakes I made. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I hope you've found. I didn't know what to feel when I read it. Part of me wanted to respond to say something, but another part of me knew that this was just another chapter in the book. So I didn't reply. I simply sat with the message for a moment, and then, because I realized that the only forgiveness I needed was for myself. Mia's apology wasn't something I was waiting for. I had already forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to let go of the bitterness. I didn't need her to validate my. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was moving forward. I was creating. I was living the life I had fought for. And in that, I had already found my redemption. It's strange how life can sometimes come full circle. For so long, I thought I had to be defined by my past, by Mia's betrayal, by the anger I had carried with me for so long. I thought I would always be that person trapped in the echo of the past forever. The art world had embraced me in a way I had never expected. It wasn't just about being recognized for my talent or being invited to exclusive shows. It was about the connection I had finally made with myself. I had stopped living for the approval of others, stopped measuring my success by external standards. Now my success was measured by the way I felt about my own work, by the way I had. And then one night, while preparing for another upcoming exhibit, I received a message that took me completely by surprise. It was from an old friend, someone I had lost. Alana, I don't know if you remember me, but I've been following your journey. I just wanted to reach out and say that I've been so inspired by everything you've done. You've been through so much, and I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. If you ever want. Her name was Sarah. She had been one of my closest friends before Mia, and though we had parted ways over time, I never forgot the bond we had shared. Her message hit me in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just the kind words, it was the realization that I reached out to her and we made plans to meet the following week. As I walked into the cafe to meet her, I was filled with a sense of nervous excitement. I hadn't realized how much I had missed human connection, how much I had longed for someone who truly knew me, who didn't see me just as the. When Sarah walked in, she looked exactly the same, like she had never left. Her smile was as warm and genuine as I remembered, and as soon as we sat down, it was like we spent hours catching up, talking about everything and nothing. We spoke about life, art, and everything in between. But what struck me the most was how much Sarah had changed too. She had been through her own struggles, her own battles, but here she was, strong, centered, and truly happy. We laughed, shared stories, and as the evening came to an end, Sarah looked at me with a smile that spoke volumes. I'm so proud of you, Alana. I knew you'd find your way, and I'm glad you found peace. But don't forget that you don't have to do it alone. Her words echoed in my mind long after I left the cafe. In that moment, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. The road to healing isn't just about confronting the past, it's about embracing the future. And it wasn't just about Mia anymore. It wasn't about revenge or forgiveness. It was about the relationships I had built along the way. The people who had supported me. the people who had stuck by me even when I had found my peace not in the success or the recognition, but in the relationships I had cultivated both with myself and as I stood at the opening of my final exhibit of the year surrounded by friends old and new, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter. One where I didn't have to fight to prove my worth. The journey wasn't easy. It wasn't always smooth, and it was filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty. But as I looked around at the people who had supported me at the art that now filled the room, I realized I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was a person who had learned to live for herself. And that in the end was the greatest work of art I'd ever created. A year has passed since that pivotal moment when I truly let go. The gallery shows the recognition, the constant stream of emails and messages, they've all become part of the landscape I've built. But what stands out to me now more than anything, I never thought I'd find peace like this, not after everything. But it wasn't peace in the way I'd imagined. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from others accepting me or forgiving me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from it was the kind of peace that comes from within. I had spent so many years chasing external validation, trying to prove my worth to others, trying to make my pain count for something. I thought that if I could just get the right recognition, if I could show the world that I was more than just someone who'd been wronged, that I would be whole. But what I found was that I was already whole. The peace I had come full circle. The strange thing is Mia is still a part of my story. But she's no longer the central figure. She's not the person I measure myself against anymore. In fact, I don't measure myself against anyone anymore. The only yardstick I have now is my own growth, my own journey. There are days when I still feel the sting of what happened, when I remember the betrayal, when the memories of the lies and the hurt come rushing back. But those days are fewer now. And when they do come, I face them with a sense. Life is too short to hold on to the past. And the more I let go, the more I realize how much space it creates for new things, new art. I've started traveling again, visiting places I had only dreamed of. I've met other artists along the way, and the connections we've shared have opened my eyes to the endless possibilities that exist I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll become a famous artist, or maybe I'll simply continue to create, living my life quietly, content with what I've built. But I've realized something important. The future isn't something to fear. It's something and for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of it. As I look back at the path I've taken, I realize that it wasn't the betrayal or the revenge or the pain that shaped me. It was the way I chose to rise above it all. It was the way I took control of my own life, and the way I allowed myself. In the end, it's not about how many people recognize my art or how many accolades I get. It's about the truth in my work, the joy I feel when I'm creating, and that is more than enough. The months following my final exhibit were a time of reflection. I had come so far from that broken, betrayed woman who once couldn't see a way forward to someone who had finally built a life that was truly her own. I had learned so many things. I hadn't just rebuilt my art career. I had rebuilt my life. Every brushstroke, every canvas was a testament to that journey. I had carved out my own path, no longer relying on the opinions or validation. But life, as it always does, continued to throw curveballs. One morning, as I was sipping my coffee and reviewing my next project, I received a call. It was from a gallery in Paris. They wanted to feature my work in an international art showcase. The gallery was well known, and their exhibitions were renowned for launching artists into the global spotlight. This wasn't just a next step in my career, it was huge. It was the opportunity I had once. The timing felt strange. A few years ago, I would have jumped at the chance without hesitation. But now, standing at this crossroads, I'd been invited to New York, to London, to Berlin, all places where the art world had reached out to me, recognizing the work I had done. But this was Paris, the place that had always felt like the pinnacle of everything I had ever wanted to achieve. I spent a few days contemplating it. I thought about the sacrifices I had made to get here, the struggles, the losses. And yes, even the betrayal. It had all led me to this point. It wasn't about showing Mia I had won. It wasn't about revenge or proving anything to anyone. It was about me, my growth, my art, my legacy. And that was something I had already built. What I realized during those quiet days of reflection was that while I wasn't doing this for the recognition anymore. I was doing this because it was my passion, my truth. The artist I had become was not defined by where I exhibited, so I made my decision. I said yes. But I did it on my own terms. I would travel to Paris, but I wouldn't go as the woman seeking validation. I would go as the artist who had already found her place in the world. And as I prepared for the journey, I realized something even more important. I wasn't defined by where I went or what others thought of me. I was defined by my art, my vision, and my willingness to embrace. And with that realization, I took a deep breath, packed my bags, and prepared to step into the next chapter. It was everything I had imagined, and yet it was so much more than I ever expected. As I walked through the bustling streets of the city, I could hardly believe it was real. This was the place I had always dreamed of, where art wasn't just a profession. The gallery was everything I had hoped for. Elegant, refined, and breathtaking. The moment I stepped into the space where my pieces would be displayed, I knew this was where I was meant to be. But there was still that feeling inside me, a lingering, was I ready for this? Was I ready to take the next step? The opening night was everything I had imagined. The room was filled with art enthusiasts, collectors, critics, and other artists, each of them looking at my work with awe. I had already heard the whispers, the comments about how bold my work was, how it spoke to people, how it was raw and real. Nervousness. It was funny. I had been through so much betrayal, pain, redemption, and yet here I was feeling uncertain about this very moment. But as I stood there watching the crowd admire my pieces, I realized something. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about the art being flawless. It was about the journey. It was about creating something meaningful, something that had come. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was simply expressing myself. The evening wore on and the conversations continued to buzz around me. But something changed. Mia's presence, her influence, her shadow had finally disappeared from my life, like the final notes of a song fading into the distance. She wasn't there. I wasn't looking for her. I wasn't looking for anyone's approval. I had already reached the place it was defined by the art. As I stood there surrounded by my work, I caught sight of a familiar face. My heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah, my old friend, standing near one of my pieces, smiling at me. It had been years since we had reconnected, and the fact that she was here among the first people to see my work. She walked over to me, her eyes full of admiration. "Alana, this is incredible. You've done it." I smiled, a sense of warmth and gratitude filling me. "It's not just me," I said. "It's the journey. Every piece of pain, every lesson, it's all." She nodded. "And it's all been worth it. Look at where you are." As we stood there talking about the journey we had both been on, I realized that this moment right here, right now, was my moment of truth. Not because of the success, the recognition, or the accolades, but because I had finally arrived at a place where I was free from the past. The journey had led me to this moment, to this city, to this gallery. But most importantly, it had led me back to myself. Paris was everything I had hoped for and more. The city, with its timeless charm, its artistry, and its endless possibilities, had become a backdrop for the final chapter of my journey. It was a place where I could truly appreciate how far I had come, not just. As the exhibition came to a close, I found myself standing alone in the gallery, the lights dimming as the crowd began to disperse. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had done it. I had come full circle. The journey that had begun with betrayal, anger, and pain had culminated in something beautiful. I had found peace not through revenge or recognition, but through the art I created. Through the act of letting go, of releasing the past and embracing the future. I had learned that no one, not Mia, not the critics, not anyone could take away the most As the last of the visitors left, I walked through the gallery taking one last look at the pieces that had come to define me. They were a reflection of every battle I had fought, every scar I had healed, and every moment of growth I had experienced. They were more than just paintings, they were my legacy. And in that moment, I realized that the real victory wasn't in how my work was received, but in how much I had learned to I walked out of the gallery into the crisp Parisian night, the city bustling around me. But in my heart, I didn't need anything else. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I paused on the steps outside the gallery, looking out at the streets of Paris. It felt like the end of a long journey, but I knew deep down that it was I wasn't who I used to be. I wasn't defined by the betrayal, by the pain, or even by the art. I was defined by the way I had chosen to rise from it all to become someone stronger, someone who had taken control of her own narrative. I had built a life that was. As I looked up at the stars, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the lessons, the challenges, and the strength I had gained. For the people who had supported me along the way. For Mia, too, because without her. And with that, I took a deep breath, stepped forward into the night, and embraced